advantages of being press officer in a political party is you get to get prior notice of some of the speeches. Now, Councillor Warwick did not trust me with his, for example, so I didn't get to see everyone's. But one of the things that struck me when I read through the speeches, which I did see, was the fact that we had kept this announcement of an alliance with Reform very, very tight. And I'm sure you can understand why we need to do that, why we couldn't publicise it, and we needed to leave it for the big unveiling today. And for that reason, there was a lack of reference in the afternoon session to what had taken place in the morning, which in itself left something lacking whenever we were reviewing the layout of the conference towards the end of the week there. But I stand before you this afternoon at a historic milestone in the history of our party. The alliance between ourselves and Reform UK and TUV is a clear declaration of intent. Unionists who believe in the act of union, and isn't that a very odd sentence, daughter? Unionists who believe in the act of union will have someone to vote for. And that's very important, because what is the union if it's not the act of union? And yet we have the leader of the union of unionism at the moment trying to tell us all that we didn't understand what the union was, that it was all a mistake, that when we said we needed to see the restoration of Article 6 of the Act of Union in order to see the full restoration of Northern Ireland's place inside the United Kingdom, well, we were all misguided, and that would mean there would be tariffs and Bushwills whiskey and all sorts of absolute nonsense. But you see, it goes wider than that. Because not only do we need a voice for unionism in the upcoming election, we also need a voice for those who voted Leave in 2016. Because the honest truth is this, folks, we have no one in terms of the party political positions represented in the House of Commons at the moment who respects Northern Ireland's right and indeed the responsibility to get Northern Ireland out of the European Union. It is an inconvenient truth which is often ignored by the Remainer media in Northern Ireland, and I noticed that the Remainer media scarpered when it got to the lunch break. You know, they are obliged by law to give us coverage for our conference, but my goodness, they will not give us any more than they're absolutely obliged to give. BBC and UTV are away. We're very grateful for the fact that there is still a unionist newspaper, at least in Northern Ireland. Don't just applaud that, folks. Buy that newspaper. Buy it and subscribe. But it is an inconvenient truth for the Remainer media in Northern Ireland that 7 constituencies in Northern Ireland actually voted to leave the European Union. We are constantly reminded that somehow the people who went out and voted to remain in Northern Ireland or leave in Northern Ireland, that was a special referendum, and we can extrapolate that. We can deduct that from the rest of the United Kingdom. I'm sorry, I didn't vote as a member of Northern Ireland. I didn't vote as a part of the United Kingdom. I voted as part of the United Kingdom for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. And that's the basis on which I voted. And North Antrim and East Belfast and Upper Bann and South Antrim and East Antrim and Strangford and Lagan Valley have no business being represented in the mother of parliaments by a party that does not represent their views of their constituents as expressed in the 2016 referendum. Let's remember, folks, that the core policy of the DUP now is to implement EU law through their Toy Town Parliament at Stormont. Regardless of what they may say, regardless of how they may speak in the Commons, regardless of the letters they may issue to the press now and again to suggest something to the contrary, or the fact that they did in Southampton as well can testify to. They turn up at the back of a hall, they come and applaud some of the speeches and then go home and post on social media that they didn't like anything that was said. The wonderful thing about the Westminster elections coming up is that when you vote for a TUV, or you vote for a Reform candidate in Northern Ireland, you don't just get the opportunity to kick those people who betrayed their promises in Northern Ireland. You don't just get a chance to give your answer back to the Democratic Unionist Party. You also get the glorious opportunity to kick the Tories. It's a 2-for-1 offer. I believe that this party and Reform UK will go before the people of Northern Ireland with a solid message. But I do not mind today telling you that I wish it were not so, that we had to form this alliance, and that we have to have the sort of conference that we're having today. I would much prefer a conference, and I mean this honestly, if unionism was as united today as it was this time last year. Indeed, for months and for years, we have had what appeared to be a united unionist position. And it was our party, indeed, that not that terribly long ago, and maybe I'm letting you in on a little bit of a secret here, went into a meeting with other unionist parties and suggested, well, coming up to the Westminster election, why don't we all have a common unionist platform? Yes, fight it as different parties, fight it under our different party labels, but when you get elected to Westminster, operate under a common whip. And everybody comes together, and there's core principles there about the removal of the Irish Sea border, about common citizenship, about equal citizenship as our conference theme is today, that we can all unite around. And we can all back a single unionist candidate, regardless of our differences in policy on different issues. But I have to tell you today, conference, that when we put that position to other unionist parties, there were some people who dismissed it just out of hand. In fact, I got the distinct impression that there were some people who believed that they had an automatic right to assume that all anti-protocol votes would vote for them, regardless of whether they even went back to implementing the protocol or not. Friends, it isn't anybody in this room who made the decision that they would test that theory to the point of destruction. We have a very simple message. You cannot win assembly seats, you cannot win council seats dishonestly on the basis of making promises which you do not keep, and then expect to get a free ride at the next election. That the decision of this party to not follow the policy that it has in previous elections and standing aside in Westminster elections, and the decision this time to go forward and to fight those Westminster elections may have ramifications for unionism generally. I am well aware of that. But the simple fact is this: unionism as a political philosophy needs to find reverse gear from where it is at the minute. Because if it doesn't, this union is over. Because let me summarise the issues with the protocol for you, my friends. And forgive me if I'm somewhat tied to my notes at this juncture, but I want to get this right. What is the problem with the protocol? Quote, it undermines the union. It reduces us to second-class citizens because we cannot trade freely within our own country. It debases democracy. It gives us a form of government without proper accountability. It imposes laws and regulations over which we have no say. End quote. Not my words, ladies and gentlemen, but the words of my MP, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Someone who now tells us that when we make those arguments, Deneby, Gateway, Jim Allister, they just don't know what they're talking about. And yet it's exactly the same arguments that he himself was pontificating about just 2 years ago. But I'm delighted to be able to say that there will be a candidate on the ballot paper in Lagan Valley and up and down the breadth and breadth of this province. will not just spell out the reality of the protocol, but will be elected on a pledge to ensure that it is consigned to a Sadducee's grave, never to rise again. Thank you very much.